beautiful people. I am Oliver Perrin for Semiagog, and tonight we'll be talking about the Caucasian question. Before we get started, I do want to ask you to check to make sure you are still subscribed to this channel, Semiagog. YouTube has been shaving off subscribers, unsubscribing them without them having tried to unsubscribe from the channel, so make sure you are still subscribed and hit the bell for notifications. And please follow Semiagog on Twitter, on Minds, on Gab. There's a Discord server, and there is GoFundMe and Subscribestar for those who want to support the channel. For all those who have done so, all of the credit and none of the blame. So now to our topic. Caucasians, a global minority, have been accused of being largely, if not exclusively, responsible for everything that's currently objectionable in the human condition. Caucasians are said to be responsible for all mistreatment of non-whites in the West, and not just in the West. Whites are said to have robbed, exploited, abused, and variously ripped off non-whites across the entire globe. Perhaps worse still, whites are said to stand in the way of the equitable redistribution of wealth necessary to address the many wrongs they're allegedly responsible for. All we can ever do is move towards making amends, because no real amends could ever be made. How could we ever make things right? By some inexplicable twist of fate, everything we did in the past was always far too much, while today we, for some reason, can never go far enough in making up for it. I'll leave you to figure out how all that works. So to summarize, whites, or Caucasians, are responsible for everything that has gone wrong in the world since at least the 15th century, with the dawn of the great age of seafaring. There can be no question that we are evil. There can be no question that we're unjust. There can be no question that our deeds are foul, and despite our famously pale complexions, our hearts are blacker than hell's nethermost pit. Thus, the question is not, nor has it ever been, whether or not these allegations are true. Rather, the question is, and has been for at least the last 50 years, how it is whites should be treated given their many horrible crimes and injustices, from microaggressions to systemic racism, poisoning the otherwise pure past, and continuing right up to the present moment in an ongoing pattern of oppressive conduct. The real question, my friends, the real question is, what should be done about the cunning Caucasian? We've heard about a majority of European Christian nations and how they put the screws to Turkey under color of the Eastern question. We've heard about how the majority Muslim Turks wrestled with their Armenian question. Today the Turks remain deeply interested in the Kurdish question. All of us certainly have heard quite a bit about the Jewish question and the Negro question, less well known as the Polish question, used by bigger and more powerful European countries to put a lever under the national ambitions of a minority population of Poles. And most recently, we've heard about the land question in South Africa, which is being used by the majority blacks to dispossess minority whites. Such questions are always about what the majority should do about a minority. And we always see the minority being manipulated, usually to their detriment and often in deplorable, deeply destructive, and miserable ways. But there's one question on everyone's mind, one way or another. There's one question that undergirds all the various social justice proposals being put forth in the West. There's one question that remains unspoken, and because everybody's thinking it, but nobody's saying it, it wields a more cunning influence. It's a question that anti-whites of every stripe are obsessed with. It's a question all of them are working overtime to answer, working day and night, burning the midnight oil to solve. Don't allow them to pretend ignorance of their central concern. Don't allow them to squirt their usual billowing clouds of obfuscation, to swipe a metaphor from Molyneux. Anyone with eyes can see that one central question absorbs all their attention. It's the question of what to do about white people. Or to put it more precisely, what to convince white people to do about themselves. This, ladies and gentlemen, friends, one and all, this is the Caucasian question. I thought about the white question, but the Caucasian question has a better ring to it, doesn't it? The great question of our time. And it's about damn time we stop pretending that this question isn't being implicitly asked and explicitly answered before our eyes through every available channel of human communication across every hour of every day, from the bottom of the world to its top. This is the Caucasian question. How should whites make amends for what they have done? How should whites be held accountable for their centuries of hatred and exploitation of non-whites? For those of you who might resist this characterization of circumstances, I ask you to simply look at everything that's being proposed. From slavery reparations to the requirement that Caucasians not just accept but promote their own demographic replacement, every single proposal is a response to the aforementioned Caucasian question, a response to the question of how whites should make amends for their allegedly unique responsibility for everything in the world that sucks. Answering this question is supposed to take up everyone's time, and if not everyone, certainly all whites are supposed to be uniformly and uninterruptedly focused on this white-hot, guilty splinter. A nail of shame driven into our foreheads in such fashion that our crossed eyes can't help but stare at it from dawn till ever darker dusk. But I propose a different approach. Instead of chasing the rabbit of pathological altruism into the briar patch of relativism, let's look a bit more closely at this Caucasian question. Let's drag it out into the light. Let's heave it up onto the table for a closer look. Shall we? How do we describe this central question? What's the thread that holds it all together? Is it possible to identify common themes or assumptions? Can we follow the puppet strings back to the clicking anti-white orifices from which they issue, like sticky, suffocating spider silk to bind the Caucasian mind? At root, the Caucasian question is all about how white people, a clear global minority by any standard, should be held accountable for their evil ways. But we can look more closely. The fact that this question is almost always left unspoken makes no matter. Its outlines can be seen everywhere. The ubiquitous paradigm, the ineluctable narrative, is encoded into almost every medium of communication you will have occasion to encounter. You'll note that the aforementioned fact that whites are a global minority will never be discussed. And you'll see focus placed on our sneaky Caucasian ways, our cunning and exploitative behavior. We're accused of robbing and raping our way across the globe, stealing resources and enslaving whole peoples. We've been accused of being money hungry, of encoding secret systemic racism into everything we say and do, from offhand remarks beside the water cooler to the television shows and movies we produce. Because of our fundamentally irredeemable racism, it doesn't matter what we do. We encode our hatred into every aspect of our culture, of our whiteness. And so each successive pink generation we raise will come forth as full of hate as the last cohort of evil gammons. As sure as death and taxes, it could not be otherwise. The only way to prove we're sorry about our abject racism is to accept that racism is just a part of being white. We can never overcome it. We should just accept the fact that as whites, we were born racist. I know this because people who aren't white and who therefore cannot be racist told me so. All we can hope to do is destroy ourselves. All we can do to even begin to address the horrors we've inflicted on the world is to denounce ourselves, give up our lands, our institutions, and our cultures on behalf of others, and pay them to replace our own. Nothing could be more welcome than our eventual disappearance. It's only right. It's only just. The only thing more just than our disappearing no later than, tomorrow morning would be if we had never existed in the first place. We whites, a global minority amounting to something like, 10 or 15% of the world's population, we Caucasians stand accused of subverting and exploiting the world through our crafty, money-hungry ways. We're said to rob, rape, misdirect, exploit, and shaft our way across this sad plane of manifestation like some world-hungry horde of more Caucasian Mabden vermin set forth upon the face of the multiverse. Open your eyes and see it. Open your ears and hear it. There is a question. And if you're white, it's a question about you. And they're asking it all the time, proposing answers to it all the time. For all that the question is usually unspoken, part of the unexamined context, part of the many commie-crafted and meticulously metastasizing, institutionally inculcated assumptions. Oh yes, they're asking the question. But you have to pay attention. You have to wake up and look around yourself. Not only is it usually left unsaid, it's also hidden behind other questions, behind other secondary contingent questions. Questions like, how can we improve the condition of African Americans in the US? Or how can Dutch people be more welcoming and supportive of the new Dutch populations that show no interest in integration? How can Brits be more forgiving and supportive of disadvantaged gangs of rapists who happen to all share one religion? Or how can German police be less racist towards growing numbers of North Africans involved in crime? Or how can French taxpayers do more to support the populations being imported to replace them? Note, however, that one feature is common across the various answers to this central unspoken question, to this Caucasian question. Here I refer to the fact that all these secondary questions and their answers all entail whites doing something about the condition of others. The axis around which all of this turns is the idea that we Caucasians are the ones who not only should, but must do something. We are the ones who must do something about ourselves. No other group is expected to do anything for themselves. No other group can be racist. No other group can be responsible for their own actions. No other group can be expected to get their own shit together, to say nothing of being expected to take on responsibility for everything that's gone wrong in the world. I've heard no plans to create a homeland for whites in Madagascar. I've heard no suggestions that we turn Iceland and Greenland into a kind of Caucasian Liberia to which all whites who recognize and continue to briskly flagellate themselves for their heinous crimes should remove themselves. Even those who say white Americans should go back to Europe haven't really thought that through, since the region in which whites are and always have been indigenous is now being overrun with non-whites. And so it seems that behind the scenes, a final solution to the Caucasian question has been proposed. Whites should be forced to pay for non-whites around the world. They should support non-whites with enthusiasm, or at a minimum without complaint. We know this is the preferred solution because that's what whites have been shamed and browbeaten into doing across the world. Our own homeless, our own unfortunates, our own struggling veterans, our own elderly, our own children in need of education, our own people do not warrant our care and attention. Other people, specifically non-whites, are what we should all be doing our utmost to protect and promote. But all this, which has been going on for more than half a century, all this is not good enough. The good news is that the final solution will take everything one step further. The final solution, it entails whites giving up any claim to territory or to their own self-interests as a group. The final solution entails the disappearance of whites as a block of related ethnicities and cultures, or at best their reduction to a harried and servile minority with the kind of sad status of whites that we see in South Africa. Those who refuse to accept the sick fantasies that underpin the Caucasian question, those that reject the proposed answers to the Caucasian question, those who push back against the reduction of white populations to minority status in their own historical lands and nations, these people will be branded as racist. But even those who meekly and submissively go along with the final solution, those willing to follow orders given them by anti-whites and others, not even these people will be let off of the hook. They will still be smeared as being swollen with unjust white privilege, tainted by wrong think, and riddled with deeply unnatural biases and prejudices. One way or another, you're a pox on the globe, whitey, whether as an outright racist or as an insufficiently contrite beneficiary of generations of uniquely white bigotry. There's only one problem with this. It's all bullshit. I deal with people on an individual basis, and because I am exceptional, I stand ready to make exceptions. I continue to hope that I have no enemies in the world, only unconvinced friends. I very carefully obey the law. I pursue frank and open discussion as the best path forward to avoid bloodshed. I have no interest in violence. In fact, my aim is to avoid it in any and every way I can. But know this: I am no victim. Those so enthusiastic about the Caucasian question, those so deeply interested in proposing answers that amount to asking whites to destroy themselves, should bear in mind that my tribe is not one of victims. Those who suggest a kind of final solution to the Caucasian question should think long and hard about what I just said. You'd think after all this time they'd have listened, at least a little, to their own propaganda. After all, across the world, anti-whites keep asserting that only non-whites can be victims. As they say over and over again, whites could never be victims because they're always the victimizers. So in the perhaps vain hope that any chance of these deeply unpleasant things happening can be prudently avoided, I invite those so eager to eradicate what they like to call whiteness to meditate upon their own rhetoric. We're really nice until we're not. So let's stop all this foolishness right now. What do you say? Would you prefer to keep things friendly? I'm not the kind of guy, believe me, I am not the kind of guy who gets off saying, "I told you so." The only way I will take that job is if the only other job is being dead in a ditch. I prefer to step around or over all of these stupid fucking manufactured problems. But the window of opportunity that might allow this is fast closing. And it's closing because the majority has asked the Caucasian question. Whether they will admit it or not, it echoes in the air around me. I can hear it. And we, the minority, may well be forced to meet the challenge. Let us all hope that saner and more charitable heads prevail. Let us hope it never comes to that. Because if it does, we will all discover, weeks, months, or even years from now, that the only true thing you ever said about us is that in the end, we're never the victims.